I never thought my neighbor would notice, until she caught me staring and smiled. It was one of those golden late afternoon moments when the sunlight seemed to pause, just for a second, to hang softly over the courtyard. I had stepped out to grab the mail, my mind half on errands and half on the hum of a regular day. That's when I saw her. My neighbor standing on her balcony, watering her small row of potted plants. I froze, just for a second, captivated without even realizing it. There was something about the way the sun caught her hair, illuminating the warm, honey-brown strands that fell casually over her shoulders. The gentle tilt of her head as she focused on the blossoms, the faint crease of concentration on her forehead. It all felt intensely alive, intensely real. I told myself not to stare, but my eyes betrayed me. I found myself drawn to the elegance of her movements, the natural grace in something as simple as bending to touch a leaf or adjusting a pot. There was a rhythm to her, quiet yet confident, and I couldn't look away. The soft rustle of her blouse as it shifted with her movements, the distant chirping of birds in the courtyard, and the warm breeze carrying the faint scent of flowers all combined into a single, vivid moment that felt almost cinematic. And then, almost imperceptibly, she looked up. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, time itself seemed to hesitate. I wasn't sure if she had noticed me before, but now it was undeniable. The corner of her mouth lifted slightly, a brief, knowing smile that didn't mock but invited, as if she'd been aware all along of the wandering gaze from below. My stomach tightened, a mixture of thrill and embarrassment washing over me. I turned my eyes away, pretending to check the mailbox, but my heart was still lodged in that fleeting glance, replaying it silently. I couldn't stop analyzing the moment. How had a simple afternoon turned into something that made my pulse race? There was a quiet tension I hadn't expected, a gentle pull that felt like gravity. My mind kept circling back to the warmth in her eyes, the subtle tilt of her head, and the effortless poise that made her presence so magnetic. Even the mundane, the slight squeak of a pot shifting or the distant drone of a car, became part of this strangely intimate memory. For a long while, I stood there, pretending to focus on my task while secretly hoping for another glance. I felt guilty for staring, but at the same time I didn't want the moment to end. There was an unspoken understanding forming, delicate and fragile, between two people who hadn't spoken but had already noticed each other in ways words couldn't capture. And as I walked back inside, I caught one last glimpse of her leaning against the railing, silhouetted in the warm glow of the afternoon sun, and I realized that, somehow, our lives had shifted in that single glance. Something had begun, quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet impossibly and irresistibly real. After that first accidental glance, something between us shifted. The next few days, I started noticing her everywhere, though I wasn't sure if it was really her or my imagination. Sometimes she was just visible through the slats of her blinds, watering her plants or reading a book with her legs curled up comfortably on the balcony chair. Other times, I caught glimpses of her walking down the courtyard, coffee in hand, the afternoon sun catching her hair and casting a soft glow around her. Every little movement seemed intentional, though I knew it probably wasn't. Yet it made my chest tighten in ways I didn't expect. It wasn't long before I realized that she knew I noticed her. There was a rhythm to her awareness, subtle but unmistakable. A tilt of her head when she glanced in my direction, a quiet hum of amusement in her smile when our eyes met. The first time it happened intentionally, I was returning from the grocery store. I had my bags in hand, head slightly down, pretending not to notice anything outside the window. And then I caught it, her gaze, steady and teasing, like she was daring me to look. My pulse skipped. She didn't scold. She didn't frown. She simply held my gaze for a second longer than necessary, her lips curving into the faintest smirk, and that small moment was enough to make me aware of every nerve ending in my body. The courtyard suddenly became a stage for the tiniest, most meaningful gestures. She would lean casually against the railing, one hand brushing back her hair, exposing the graceful line of her neck. Nothing vulgar, just intimate in a way that made it impossible to look away. I found myself walking slower, lingering just a little longer near her door, hoping for a chance to be noticed again. Sometimes, the wind would catch the hem of her dress or the loose strands of hair, and I would freeze, the scene imprinting itself on my memory like a photograph I couldn't stop studying. There was an almost playful rhythm to it, an unspoken conversation carried entirely through glances and the smallest body movements. The soft hum of her laughter when she noticed me, the sway of her body as she shifted her weight on the balcony, the faint rustle of leaves as she moved. Every detail became a piece of a private language that existed between us, even though we hadn't spoken a word. Inside me, emotions tangled in a confusing but thrilling mix. I was embarrassed by how easily she had captured my attention, yet the pull toward her was undeniable. I found myself analyzing her every gesture, wondering what each glance, each subtle smile, each casual movement really meant. Was she aware of the effect she had on me? Did she know how the smallest of gestures could make my heart race? By the end of the week, it became impossible to ignore that we were dancing around each other without words, building a tension that felt like a quiet promise of something more. Even though we hadn't spoken, I could feel the beginnings of a connection forming, delicate, subtle, and electric. And somewhere, deep down, I realized that I was already anticipating the next time our eyes would meet, the next small gesture that would speak volumes. It started with small, accidental meetings that quickly became the most anticipated moments of my day. One morning, I was heading out to get coffee when I bumped into her at the mailbox. It wasn't dramatic, just a soft collision as we both reached for the same letter. But the way her hand brushed against mine sent an unexpected jolt through me, a spark of electricity that lingered long after the moment passed. I quickly pulled back, muttering an awkward apology, but she just laughed softly, a sound that felt like sunlight spilling into a shadowed room. Her laughter was light, unforced, and somehow intimate, as if she were letting me into a small world that no one else could enter. Her eyes met mine, calm yet teasing, and I caught myself staring again, though I tried desperately not to. The warmth of her hand against mine lingered in my memory, the soft pressure like a whisper, almost a touch of invitation, even in such a mundane setting. The mundane itself suddenly felt different. The squeak of the mailbox hinge, the faint rustle of leaves in the courtyard, even the soft thump of my own heartbeat felt amplified. Later that week, I ran into her at the local grocery store. I was reaching for a carton of milk when I noticed her in the next aisle, selecting fresh vegetables with deliberate care. Our eyes met, and she held my gaze just long enough to make me feel seen, fully seen, in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. She gave me that same faint smile, a curve of the lips that hinted at amusement, understanding, and maybe even a little mischief. I felt my shoulders tense and relax all at once. There was a subtle intimacy in these encounters, an almost imperceptible closeness that made each meeting feel like a secret conversation. Our bodies seemed to find each other in space. A casual brush of hands while passing, the brief meeting of shoulders in a narrow aisle, even the shared reach for a common item. Each touch was fleeting, nothing more than a whisper against the skin. Yet it left a lingering warmth, a reminder that connection was possible even in the smallest, most ordinary moments. I found myself analyzing every detail. The soft swish of her blouse as she turned, the way her fingers lingered on the produce she picked up, the faint scent of her perfume drifting toward me in a subtle, almost magnetic trail. My heart raced with every glance, every incidental touch, every small smile. And yet, there was a tension, a hesitation I felt in both of us. I wondered if I was imagining her intent, if she felt the same pull, or if this was just coincidence magnified by my own desire. By the end of the week, these accidental encounters had become a quiet ritual I looked forward to. Every touch, every glance, every shared space felt charged with unspoken meaning. There was no rush, no overt confession, but the tension between us grew palpable. Something had shifted, subtly but undeniably. We were no longer just neighbors passing by each other. We were two people orbiting a connection neither of us had dared to name, yet both of us were aware it existed, waiting for the right moment to surface. The rhythm between us had been building quietly, almost imperceptibly, until one afternoon, it broke the surface in a way I hadn't anticipated. I was coming back from the grocery store, arms full of bags, when I noticed her on her balcony, leaning casually against the railing, the sunlight catching her hair in golden highlights. Our eyes met, as they always did these days, but this time there was a spark that felt different, warmer, more deliberate. My heart pounded, and I knew she noticed. She tilted her head slightly, that faint, knowing smile tugging at her lips, and in a voice that was soft but teasing enough to make me stumble over my own words, she said it. "I catch you staring, and I like it." The words weren't shouted, they weren't dramatic. They were casual, almost conversational, but the effect was seismic. My mind froze, caught somewhere between embarrassment, thrill, and disbelief. Part of me wanted to deny it, to look away and pretend it hadn't happened, but another part of me was exhilarated, craving more of this unspoken, intimate connection. There was something about the way she said it, the warmth in her tone, the slight lilt of amusement, the steady confidence in her gaze, that made it impossible to retreat. Her eyes held mine with a quiet, unspoken challenge, as if daring me to acknowledge the truth I had been hiding even from myself. I felt the tension coil inside me, a mixture of excitement and nervous energy that made my chest feel tight. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. I could sense the smallest movements around her. A breeze fluttering through the balcony plants, the subtle sway of her body as she leaned a little closer, the soft rustle of her clothes, and each detail heightened the intensity of the moment. The sunlight played across her features, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw, the gentle arch of her eyebrows. Every detail seemed magnified, every gesture charged with meaning. I struggled to respond. Words caught somewhere between my mind and my lips. My hands fidgeted, gripping the grocery bags a little too tightly, while my pulse raced in a rhythm that felt impossibly loud. She didn't rush me, didn't force my reaction. She simply let the moment linger, letting her eyes do the talking while I grappled with my own awareness of desire and hesitation. There was a subtle intimacy in the pause, a quiet acknowledgement that something was shifting. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't overtly romantic, but it was electric. In that fleeting moment, I realized that our connection had moved beyond stolen glances and accidental touches. We were entering a space where words were secondary to understanding, where a single phrase could carry the weight of emotions we hadn't yet named. As I finally managed a nervous, slightly awkward smile, she chuckled softly, tilting her head in that graceful, effortless way that had me captivated from the beginning. The tension didn't dissipate. It settled around us like a warm glow, intimate and reassuring. Something had changed between us, subtly but irreversibly, and I knew that this was just the beginning of a deeper, more deliberate connection. One that neither of us could ignore, no matter how hard we tried. After her subtle confession, everything between us shifted. The stolen glances and accidental touches became deliberate, though still gentle, as if we were learning a new rhythm together, one measured in quiet gestures and the warmth of shared spaces. It was no longer just about noticing each other. It was about feeling each other's presence, even in the most ordinary moments. One evening, I found myself carrying a stack of books up to her apartment. An excuse, I told myself, to return a borrowed novel. She opened the door before I could knock, wearing a soft cardigan that draped over her shoulders, and her smile caught me off guard. It was warm, sincere, and carried the faint trace of amusement that had become familiar. I realized, suddenly, that I had been anticipating this very moment all day. We moved through casual conversation, laughing softly at shared jokes and commenting on trivial things like the weather or the quirky sounds from the street below. Yet beneath the ordinary dialogue, something deeper was unfolding. I noticed the way she leaned slightly toward me when she spoke, how her eyes lingered on mine longer than necessary, and how the corners of her lips curved in quiet, knowing ways. It was subtle, but it carried weight. An unspoken message that said, "I see you, and I enjoy being seen by you." There were touches now, brief and natural, that sent shivers through me. A hand brushing against my arm while passing a mug, her fingertips resting momentarily on my shoulder as she laughed at a story I told. Nothing overt, nothing rushed, just fleeting, intimate contact that lingered in memory long after the moment ended. The smallest gestures became loaded with meaning, each one building a silent dialogue that neither of us dared to voice aloud. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and old books, a comforting mix that made everything feel more personal, more immediate. The light from the setting sun spilled through the window, casting warm shadows across her face and highlighting the soft lines of her expression. I felt a strange sense of peace and anticipation simultaneously. Peace in being near her, and anticipation for the next moment that would draw us closer. I found myself listening not just to her words, but to the quiet nuances. The slight pause before she spoke, the way her fingers fidgeted with the edge of a sleeve, the subtle warmth radiating from her when she leaned closer. I realized that intimacy wasn't just physical. It was emotional, woven into these shared spaces, shared silences, and small touches. It was learning the rhythm of another person and feeling it echo in your own chest. By the time I left that evening, the world outside her door felt quieter, softer, as if our little bubble of connection had carried me away from everything else. The tension between us had grown, but it was no longer awkward or uncertain. It was warm, inviting, and full of promise. A slow-burning intimacy that neither words nor actions could fully capture, but that existed in every glance, every touch, and every shared moment. The connection between us had grown quietly over weeks, a rhythm of stolen glances, playful teasing, and lingering touches. But that evening, everything felt sharper, more fragile, as if the air itself had been charged with unspoken truths. I had stopped by her apartment to drop off some tea I had promised, and the moment I stepped inside, I sensed a tension that was different from before. She wasn't smiling immediately. Instead, she was leaning against the counter, her arms crossed lightly, a contemplative look in her eyes. I hesitated, unsure how to approach, yet drawn to her all the same. The familiar scent of her perfume, subtle, comforting, mixed with the warmth of the room, wrapping around me like an invisible embrace. "Hey!" I said softly, trying to bridge the quiet. She looked up, her gaze meeting mine, and in that instant, everything unspoken between us felt heavier, more immediate. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice slightly trembling, betraying a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. My chest tightened. This wasn't playful teasing anymore. This was real. Her eyes searched mine, looking for understanding, for reassurance, for connection. I nodded, setting the tea on the counter, and we settled near the window where the fading sunlight spilled across the room, casting warm, golden hues over everything. She began slowly, hesitating between words, revealing parts of herself she rarely shared. Her fears about getting hurt, her uncertainties about someone younger noticing her in a way that was meaningful, and the silent weight of judgment she often felt from the world outside. Each word landed softly but powerfully, and I could feel my heart respond, wanting to comfort, to be near, to hold that vulnerability with care. Without thinking, I reached out and gently placed my hand over hers. It was a small gesture, simple, almost accidental, yet it carried everything I wanted to say. "I understand. I'm here. You're not alone." She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers twined slightly with mine, and I felt a warmth radiate through my chest. Her head tilted ever so slightly, resting near my shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of trust and connection. The quiet stretched between us, filled with shared breaths, the subtle rustle of her cardigan, the faint hum of the city outside. It was a moment of pure intimacy, not physical in any overt sense, but infinitely deeper because it was born of honesty and openness. Her vulnerability invited mine. I found myself confessing small insecurities I hadn't shared with anyone else, the worries I had about overstepping, about being too forward, about the awkwardness of age differences in the unspoken context of attraction. By the end of the evening, the tension had softened, replaced by a profound sense of closeness. Our hands lingered together, her head resting lightly near my shoulder, and we simply existed in the quiet comfort of being seen and accepted. It was a pivotal moment, the emotional peak of our slow-burn journey, where attraction, trust, and vulnerability intertwined. And though nothing had been declared outright, everything had been communicated. We had crossed the invisible line from curiosity and tension into genuine, heartfelt connection. After weeks of stolen glances, fleeting touches, and quiet conversations, there was a sense that something had shifted permanently between us. The tension that had once been electric but uncertain now felt grounded, tender, and real. That evening, I found myself standing outside her apartment again, the familiar hum of the city around me blending with the flutter of anticipation in my chest. I had no errands, no excuses, only the desire to be near her, to close the invisible distance that had defined our slow-burn connection for so long. When she opened the door, the sight of her took my breath away in the same way it had the very first time I noticed her. She was casually leaning against the doorframe, her eyes lighting up when they met mine. There was no teasing this time, no playful smirk, just warmth, patience, and a quiet invitation. I stepped inside, my gaze tracing the familiar contours of her apartment, the little details that had become meaningful to me. The well-loved books stacked on the counter, the plants that thrived in the sunlit corners, and, most importantly, the woman who had become the center of my world. We didn't rush to speak. Instead, we moved closer naturally, as if the space between us had finally understood its purpose. I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her, the soft brush of her hair as she leaned slightly toward me. Our hands found each other again, lingering with a gentle insistence, as if neither of us wanted to let go. Her eyes searched mine, calm and steady, holding unspoken questions, hopes, and acknowledgments that words could never fully capture. "I've really enjoyed this," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of honesty and vulnerability. My heart tightened. I reached up, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, my fingers grazing her cheek in the most tentative, yet intimate gesture. The warmth of her skin under my touch sent a quiet thrill through me, a signal that this was more than attraction. It was connection, understanding, and mutual care. She leaned in slightly, her forehead resting against mine for just a moment, a gesture that was tender, grounding, and infinitely reassuring. We didn't need to rush. The world outside could wait. In that small, quiet space, our breaths mingled, our fingers entwined, and our hearts spoke the truths we had been feeling all along. It wasn't dramatic or loud, but it was enough, more than enough. As we finally pulled back slightly, her smile returned, warmer and softer than ever before. "I'm glad you stayed," she whispered, and I knew she didn't just mean in that moment. I squeezed her hand gently, my own smile reflecting the same sentiment. The unspoken understanding between us had become tangible. This was our beginning, built on laughter, glances, trust, and the slow burn of something real. We didn't need fireworks or grand declarations. The intimacy of shared space, lingering touches, and mutual vulnerability was its own declaration. That night, we sat together near the window, hands brushing occasionally, watching the city lights flicker as we existed quietly in a connection that neither time nor hesitation could unravel. And in that moment, I realized, some things don't need words to feel profound. Some connections, slow burning and carefully nurtured, become unforgettable simply because they are real. Love can start in the smallest of moments. A glance, a touch, a shared smile. If this story touched you, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more stories like this, and share your favorite moment in the comments below.